Where would you draw the line? Why not with serious drugs? Who is going to draw that line? Is it arbitrary? And why would we have a principle if we say, well, in these cases it doesn't apply? And then when do you stop there? Do you say, okay, this person has to answer these questions, but they refuse to. So now do we abolish the right to be free of torture? Should we use waterboarding on this person to make them talk? And then we know
those are completely invalid. Those are completely invalid comparisons, and they're the common ones used by the profession to justify its position, which is just that this is all a game. The Brits have found not much trouble in drawing the line where they did. If it's confined to saying if someone fails to answer questions that are natural questions in the circumstances, and then fails to make themselves available when a court is looking for the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and the person who's most likely to know the truth sits there in silence, that's a legitimate thing for a court to take note of. It may not condemn them, but it's a legitimate, relevant fact.
Stephen, to take up Anne's point, though, in Australia there was a move to remove the right to silence in bikie gang violence cases, and there would presumably be many areas considered very serious where the right isn't considered useful. So she's right about where you would actually draw that line.
I wouldn't draw the line on the kind of offence at all. I think it's just a very false use of the word right. It's not a right. It doesn't say removing it doesn't mean that you can be made to speak. You can still choose not to speak. It's just that people can draw.
Can't you? That's the thing.
Yeah, people can then draw the natural conclusion. If you're the one who was there and no one knows better than you, and you refuse to say anything, well, it's pretty telling.
Well, I think with respect, Stephen, you're talking about something different. You're talking about the inference that can be drawn from you exercising the right to silence. That's a completely different concept.
Well, it's not. It's the way the Brits. It's
you actually have the right to silence, regardless of what the alleged charge or crime is. And in terms of that right to silence, I would argue that is a principled approach, that everybody, whatever the situation, has the right not to speak. If there is evidence to prove that somebody did something, then the police can call that evidence. There will be other evidence other than a confession, because you don't want anyone to speak unless they're going to confess. You only want their contribution if they're going to contribute something useful to it. If they say, I didn't do that, you wouldn't be interested in that.
Can I ask you?
It may not be. It may be, a child's got 16 fractures. They may actually want them to describe what was happening in there, who else had access, who's been the babysitter. There's a whole lot of things that you could say. If they won't even answer those questions, then the finger of suspicion points very firmly at you, and a jury is entitled to know that. It's just common sense.
Yes, but I think you have to be very clear that there are two different principles here. One is the right to silence. The other is what the jury can infer from the exercise of that silence.
Well, there is no right. They're not two different things. I don't know anyone who has said that you abolish the right for someone to shut their mouth, but the debate has always been in legal circles over whether the court can draw the inference, and that's the issue.
Wasn't the right to silence, just really quickly, originally to guard the personal liberty of citizens from state oppression? Isn't that where it arose?
Well, they used to be held and tortured until they said something.
Yeah. All right. Anne, thank you. Anne Stevens joining us at the end there. Stephen Franks has been on the panel today. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Sorry, Linda, for talking too much.
My head's hurting a bit now. I'm going to go home and water my plants and look at the cat.
And look at the cat for the last time. Linda, Helen, thank you, and good luck tomorrow.
Cheers.
That's us. We're back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody, and here's Checkpoint.
Tō te maira, he hoama, he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Tonight, an 11-year-old killed after she was hit by a train. There have been warnings for many years, but on a sunny weekend day, the bridge and the river beneath it is a magnet for children. What can be done to keep them off or keep them safe? Also tonight, 27,000 nurses take their own financial pulse and say they are under pressure, overworked and underpaid. And on the subject of health and money, the very high cost of going to the dentist. Vladimir Putin is back well and truly. Russia votes to give him his 4th term as president. Money laundering in NZ. And will West Papua be on the agenda when the PM meets the Indonesian president?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batana ho. The Prime Minister has written to the US President seeking an exemption from his steel and aluminium tariffs. Donald Trump signed off earlier this month on tariffs of 25% on steel imports and 10% on aluminium imports, but exempted some countries, including Canada, Mexico and Australia. Jacinda Ardern says she outlined in the letter her understanding of his concerns and what drove the imposition of the tariffs.
And some of the things that would be considered in deciding whether or not any country would be exempt. So those are things that I've incorporated into that letter, and of course we are awaiting a response, as are many other countries who have sought an exemption as well.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. The Tiwai aluminium smelter will be paying the greatest share of a $4 million deal to clean up thousands of tonnes of hazardous waste. The smelter dross has been stockpiled in Southland since its processor, Taha International, went into liquidation nearly 2 years ago. Here's our Otago Southland reporter Ian Telfer.
Taha's liquidators couldn't fund the cost of removal, so the Gore District Council stepped in. Under the deal it's brokered, the smelter and the government will pay 3/4 of the cost, and the 4 Southland councils and 4 landowners will cover the rest. The council's chief executive, Steve Parry, says striking the deal's a huge milestone because the 10 parties all wanted the problem solved, but to pay as little as possible. He says it'll take about 2 years to ship the material to Australia for disposal. In Dunedin, Ian Telfer.
A Ngārua Wahia resident is rubbishing claims that being on the town's rail bridge and jumping off it is some sort of rite of passage for young people. Yesterday, an 11-year-old girl who was walking across the bridge was hit and killed by a train. Risky behaviour on the bridge has been a problem in the Waikato town for many years. Polly Martin, who was born and bred there, says in her day people were more responsible.
And you know, when they see a train they get off, and when the train passes they get back. But here, it's a different generation again. So, you know, it goes in this ear and out the other ear. Where the parents is, I don't know. That's their responsibility.
Polly Martin says educating local children about the dangers is very important. A political scientist says a new report highlights the uncomfortable truth that New Zealand's boast as an easy place to do business also makes it an easy mark for criminals. In their second assessment of the risks the country faces from money laundering and the financing of terrorism, the police estimate at least $1.35 billion is laundered in New Zealand each year. Political scientist Ron Pohl welcomes the report.
So often political reports only present one side of it. Here the police report is actually very good because it presents both. It says that it recognises that New Zealand is a good place to do business, but actually that represents a significant threat for New Zealand as well because it's actually a place where criminals can easily do business.
Ron Pohl. The police say most of the money laundered is from drugs and fraud. Residents of a small town on New South Wales' southern coast have been describing how they were forced to flee a raging bushfire with little warning. It's feared up to 70 homes and buildings have been destroyed in the township of Tathra. The blaze was fanned by hot, dry winds. Wendy Whiting says many residents fled to the nearby beach as the flames advanced.
Got to the beach and it was like a cyclone. The sand hit you in the eyes. It was something terrible. So we walked all the way up again then. And then they said, oh, it's cool, you better go down to the water. Went down to the water again, then they rang and said, everybody's evacuate, go to Bega.
Wendy Whiting says she doesn't know whether her house is still standing, as residents are still waiting to get back into the affected areas. Meanwhile, fires in southwest Victoria have destroyed at least 18 homes and killed hundreds of livestock. A Cirque du Soleil performer has died after falling onto the stage during a show in Tampa Bay, Florida. Jan Arno was taking part in a performance involving aerial straps when he fell. The 38-year-old French aerialist, who had been with the company for 15 years, died in hospital later. Cirque du Soleil says it's working with local authorities to establish what went wrong. It's 5:04. Sport. Roger Federer's unbeaten tennis run in 2018 is over. Juan Martín del Potro has saved 2 match points en route to victory over Federer at the Indian Wells tournament. The Argentinian appeared on the verge of defeat when Federer served for the match at 5-4 and 40-15 in the third set. But del Potro stormed back to force another tiebreak, which he breezed through 7-2 to win the title.
I was really hungry after the second set. But, well, I was lucky in the last tie break. I played well, and finally I got the trophy.
Juan Martin Del Potro. The Blanket Shield cricket match between Canterbury and Auckland in Rangiora has been abandoned because of a dangerous pitch. Only 3 overs were bowled on the first session of the third day before umpires decided to abandon the game due to safety concerns, with Auckland at 66 for 6 in reply to Canterbury's 485 for 6 declared. The New Zealand basketballer Steven Adams is just shy of his highest NBA points tally when he scored 25 points in the Oklahoma City Thunder's 131-125 win over the Toronto Raptors. Adams was kneed in the groin late in the third quarter and unable to add to his tally when he returned to the court in the final quarter. That's the news.
Privacy breach.
I think it was a huge oversight on their part, or it felt like it might have been not accidental, to be honest.
Simon Bridges responds.
Plain and simple, this is a cock-up. It's not good enough. We've apologised to everyone concerned and we need to make sure it does not happen again.
A prudish outcry.
Cock up, cock up, cock up. There is nothing really offensive about it. It's a perfectly legitimate metaphor. So relax.
Cock-a-doodle-doo. Morning report, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, new research that could lead to improved immune responses and reduced side effects for existing vaccines. And after 10, war correspondent and writer Osne Sayerstad's haunting new book about 2 teenage sisters who joined the Syrian jihad. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow: Northland, Great Barrier Island, Coromandel Peninsula, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloudy periods and a few showers. For the remainder of the North Island, that's western areas from Auckland to Wellington, Bay of Plenty, the central high country and Wairarapa. Mainly fine, but a few showers about Auckland and western Bay of Plenty, and the odd afternoon shower inland. For Nelson and Buller, cloudy periods, a few showers about the ranges, spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, a few showers north of Hokitika, but rain with heavy falls elsewhere. Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, fine with variable high cloud. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and mainland Southland, mainly fine with warm and high cloud, but a few brief falls of rain. Stewart Island, occasional rain, and the Chatham Islands, fine and cloudy periods with a few showers tomorrow night. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. We begin tonight in Ngāroa Wahia, 20k north of Hamilton, an hour and a bit south of Auckland. There, people are mourning the death of an 11-year-old girl killed by a train on the town's rail bridge last night. On sunny days after school and in the weekends and holidays, the bridge is a hugely popular spot for young locals, and despite warning after warning, they continue to walk over it and jump off it into the Waikato River below. A 9-year-old boy was killed on the bridge in 2002. There have been so many near misses, people have lost count. In 2013, KiwiRail urged locals to keep children off the bridge. In 2015, the same word, urged, this time with police joining in. In a moment, we'll hear from the local fire chief who thinks it's time something other than urging was tried. But first, from Ngāroa Wahia, here's our Waikato reporter, Andrew McRae.
The girl was believed to be walking across the bridge with friends when a southbound freight train hit her. The bridge has fences either side of the line at both ends, but access to the track and bridge is still very easy. Peter Tutawa has lived in the town for 10 years. He regards the actions of anyone going onto the bridge as foolhardy.
Well, you know, it's a long drop too. So do they know what's underneath the railway lines and the bridge there? Could be anything down below in the water.
Polly Martin takes exception to a claim that jumping off the bridge is a rite of passage for young people.
I was born and bred in this town. We never had fatality like this in our days. Not that I jump off the bridge, but I do know a lot of people did, but they never had a problem like this. And you know, when they see a train, they get off. And when the train passes, they get back. But here, it's a different generation again. So, you know, it goes in this ear and out the other ear.
Cherie Rao says she feels frightened every time she sees young people on the bridge.
I think it's stupid. I think that they should put cages there so that people can't walk on it. or a walkway for them to jump off it so that they don't walk along the railway, something like that, just so that it's safer for them, because they're not going to stop, they're going to continue to do so.
18-year-old Jake says he's never jumped off the bridge, but knows heaps of friends who have.
Now, why do they do it?
I don't know. There's like nowhere to jump apart from the bridge, but I don't know why they do it. I never asked them that.
So I guess thrill-seeking, maybe?
Yeah.
Some people say it's seen as a rite of passage, that every young person in Ngaruahia has the right to do it as they're growing up. What do you think of that?
Nah, you don't have the right to do it. Heaps of accidents have happened.
You've never heard of that, about being a rite of passage?
No.
The feeling that nothing will really change is a common message in the town.
It's what they've always done, so that's what they do, and you won't stop it.
Sue has lived in Ngaruahia all her life and says she never went on the bridge when she was young because she was too scared. She says the only way to stop it is for parents to take responsibility.
Unless the parents go down there and pull their kids off, stop them from climbing. And you can't be with your children 24/7, so it's just the way it is.
There are some people in the town who don't accept that it is just the way it is. Jackie was part of a group who saw the mayor only a week ago to talk about the problem and to organise a public meeting.
Kiwi Rail have done quite a lot of things, have tried things, have got fences and things there, but all it means is the children have to come from a bit further back and they can still get in there. And anything they put that makes it more difficult, the children see it as a challenge. And that's something that they want to do and carry on doing it.
Jack Ayres says the community must seize the initiative and get together to work out solutions before another person dies on the bridge. The Mayor of Waikato District, Alan Sanson, seems as lost as most people on coming up with a solution.
Kiwi Rail, along with ourselves, have worked really hard to put security fencing up around it and up around underneath and around the sides and things like that. But at the end of the day, you can't block the passage of the track itself. It's a bit like putting a gate on the road. You know, somebody's going to drive through it or somebody's going to take it down sooner or later. And the problem is actually trying to get kids to not walk onto the track, be educated enough to not do that.
Kiwi Rail says it was a tragic event the train driver couldn't do anything about. The Chief Executive, Peter Reedy, says a whole new approach to solving the problem is needed.
I don't think the infrastructure is going to completely fix it. Yes, we could investigate, and I know it's been mentioned technically gating, but you've got to be careful when you put a control in like that. Sometimes you create other risks as well.
Peter Reedy says the community needs to become more involved in finding solutions. A public meeting's likely to be held in Ngaruahia in a few weeks' time. For Checkpoint, Ko Andrew McRae-Tierney.
And we'll talk to local Mayor Alan Sanson after the news at 6. Carl Lapwood is the Ngaruahia Fire Chief, born and raised in Waikato. A volunteer fire brigade, they were having a family get-together with children the same age as the girl who died when the alarm went off last evening, and they were dispatched to the bridge. He says what they found when they got there was totally heartbreaking. Now, Carl Lapwood is speaking personally, not on behalf of the fire service. But after a lifetime of watching children jump from the bridge or simply sit on it or walk across it, and very many attempts to stop them, he says it may be time to consider a different response, taking into account the fact that no amount of public meetings and well-intentioned warnings and even police interventions seem able to keep children off the bridge for long.
From a person that's, that's working in the area, that's lived around the area. I grew up in Huntly, and we've got train bridge there as well. And the facts are that kids they cross bridges, like they jump off that bridge in Ngaruahia, and they jump off all the bridges, even the Horatu Bridge. So I think the fact that we've got some dangerous trains. They are crossing that bridge. And there's kids on it. So, I don't know how you stop that, but maybe an early warning system would give them more time, because I can't see people being able to block it off in any easy way. But hey, I'm not the expert on that, and my role is really and the fire brigade's role is to really try and keep people safe, protect property, and do the best we can. But it's a difficult situation, that Pacific train bridge, isn't it?
And it's a difficult situation because, I mean, how can I say this without almost glamorising the event? And I'm not trying to do that in any way, but it looks like such good fun jumping off that bridge. And this is in a community where there are lots of families with not much money, not many things to do. And, you know, the generations of children have jumped off that bridge, right?
Mm. Well, that's their town bars, isn't it?
You're suggesting the possibility of bells like a level crossing. So once the train is 500 metres away or whatever, the bells start ringing. Is that one of the solutions that people are talking about?
Well, hey, I don't know if other people have talked about that, but I suppose I run through it in my mind last night after attending this, this tragic accident, and we put bells on crossings where cars cross over. We've got kids on this crossing. And whether that's right or wrong is not for me to really determine, but the facts is, hey, would bells help? Maybe they would. Maybe it would give them an early warning detection to give them a chance to get off if they need to. So I don't know. That's just a suggestion from myself that, hey, maybe that would give them time. We can educate everybody as much as we like, but some sort of early warning detection just gives them a bit of chance to actually make a plan and exit the place. No different than you're crossing a railway crossing in your car. You're not expecting a train just to appear out of nowhere. And the ones that don't have bell crossings on them, hey, they've been proven over years to be reasonably fatal, haven't they? And whereas now when you have bells ringing and bars coming down, well, it gives people a warning detection. Hey, there is danger coming, and we've got hundreds of kids jumping off this bridge a day, hundreds. And, so how you stop that, I think that's an impossible task, but if you give them a warning detection, well then, hey, at least we've mitigated to give them some idea that, hey, a train is approaching.
Can you just confirm that number for me? So on a sunny day in summer, there you will get hundreds of kids jumping off the bridge.
There are hundreds of kids jumping off that bridge, yeah. Yeah.
Carl Lapp with the Ngāroa Wahia Fire Chief, and will be with the Mayor of the area after 6. It's 5:17. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. The Prime Minister is promising she'll raise human rights concerns in her bilateral meeting with Indonesia's President at Parliament this evening. President Widodo arrived this morning for the first state visit by an Indonesian leader in more than a decade. But critics of the Indonesian government say it is time New Zealand took a stronger stand against Indonesia's occupation of West Papua. Here's our political reporter, Benedict Collins.
New Zealand rolled out the welcome mat for the Indonesian President Joko Widodo today for his brief visit to the country. Mr Widodo and his wife received a 21-gun military salute at Government House in Wellington this morning. After laying a wreath at the Pukeahu National War Memorial Park, they returned to Government House for a state lunch with the Governor-General, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and her Deputy Winston Peters and others. In a short pre-lunch address, Mr Widodo showed he had picked up a little local knowledge.
I'm very happy to visit this beautiful country with all its sheep.
Indonesia is a major export market for New Zealand meat and dairy. Mr Widodo said in turn he was delighted to see how much New Zealanders love one of Indonesia's key exports, and suggested coffee diplomacy could come to define the two countries' bilateral relationship.
When I see how much New Zealand people like coffee, I immediately think Indonesia has to export more coffee to New Zealand.
The Prime Minister's bilateral meeting with Mr Widodo is currently underway, and a short time ago Ms Ardern promised that in addition to talking trade, she would also be raising human rights concerns with Mr Widodo.
They include, for instance, issues of freedom of speech and access of foreign media in the Papua region, and also the rights of LGBTIQ individuals in Indonesia, and talk of a criminal code applying to them.
But the former Green MP, Catherine Delahunty, says West Papua is a weeping sore in the Pacific, and she says the new government must do more than just slap Indonesia with a wet bus ticket.
This is one of the most hidden and disgraceful political situations in the Pacific region. And, we would hope that a new government would actually take a stand and talk about this honestly with the Indonesians. We can be friends, we can be trading partners, but we also have to challenge the brutal occupation of one of our neighbouring countries.
The Governor-General, Dame Patsy Reddy, spoke at length about the similarities in trade ties between New Zealand and Indonesia in her pre-state lunch speech today, but made no mention of West Papua or human rights whatsoever. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Vladimir Putin will lead Russia for another 6 years. He secured a fourth term as president, making him Russia's longest-serving leader since Stalin. Even Brezhnev only had 18 years. Russian elections are a huge logistical exercise taking place across 11 different time zones and involving 97,000 polling stations. This election was overshadowed by the poisoning of the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter in southern England. But like Donald Trump, Putin appeals to nationalist voters, and whatever the West may be saying about him, it's Russians who vote. Add to that the particularities of a Russian election, the way one of Putin's leading opponents, for example, was ruled out from running by a fraud conviction. And the question wasn't whether Putin would win, but by how much and how many Russians would turn out to vote. Here's the BBC's Steve Rosenberg from Moscow.
He's been centre stage in Russia for the last 18 years. Tonight, by the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin thanked his people for re-electing him their president. We are destined to succeed, he said. Russia, Russia, they chanted. But in Putin's fourth term, are Russia and the West destined for a Cold War? Later, the president dismissed British accusations that he was behind the nerve agent attack in Salisbury.
It is rubbish, drivel, nonsense to think that Russia would do something like that ahead of a presidential election and the World Cup.
President Putin's pitch to voters had been, stick with me and Russia will be strong. And many Russians believe that. He's a genius, he says. Putin wants Russia to prosper and for Russians to live in happiness. It's thanks to Putin, she says, that Russia still exists. But critics of the Kremlin say the election was fixed, that only those candidates who stood no chance of unseating Vladimir Putin were allowed to run.
The problem with Russia is that there is no such thing as Russian politics. Politics has been eliminated in Russia altogether. There is only one political institution in Russia, and this is the physical body of Vladimir Putin.
Which is why Vladimir Putin was always going to win this vote.
This election wasn't about choosing a new president. It was about reappointing the old one. And although many Russians do support Vladimir Putin, crucially, it is the political system he has built in Russia that guaranteed him a landslide win.
Caught on CCTV, a woman stuffs a ballot box near Moscow. Suddenly, there are two of them at it. And during a vote count in Siberia, balloons are moved to cover the camera. Election officials say they will investigate, but the results won't change. Neither will the name of Russia's president.
Steve Rosenberg for the BBC in Moscow. Home again. Hospital nurses say they are under pressure, undervalued and angry about low pay and low staffing levels. By Friday, up to 27,000 nurses are expected to have voted on whether to accept the proposed pay deal. Just which way they'll go won't be known until Monday. But some nurses say they think strike action is now likely. Our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
District health boards have offered nurses a backdated 2% pay deal, a lump sum payment of $1,050, pay equity from next year and a commitment to better staffing. The current salary of a newly registered nurse is just under $50,000, moving up to just under $67,000. It's not known yet whether nurses will give the proposed deal offered by DHBs the thumbs up or not, but an emergency department nurse we've agreed to call Julie says nurses are under high and mounting pressure.
We're the eyes and the ears of the medical team, and we have so much more responsibility than we ever used to in the past. You know, we administer life-saving interventions. We are having to school with new technology, with new medications.
She says pay doesn't seem to match the demands. Short staffing adds to stress and promises to address it fall short.
They said we were going to have safe staffing last time in Emeka, and it just hasn't happened. A senior staff member of the department that I work in did some calculations recently, going by numbers that we see and things, and it looks that on an average shift that we're understaffed by 4 to 5 nurses at times. I mean, that's just so unsafe.
Julie says hospitals often report they are as busy now as they used to be midwinter, and nurses feel that too.
I remember, a busy day was sort of 120, maybe 130. Our busy days now, we're seeing 150, 160 and our 170. These are huge increases in numbers of patients that we're seeing when we've got, no extra staff.
Nurses began voting on the proposed pay deal recently at hospital meetings nationwide, with the last of these to take place on Friday. Julie adds she won't be surprised if it gets the thumbs down, leading to a likely strike ballot.
I don't personally know anybody that voted yes. I know there are people out there who have voted yes, especially given the scare tactics around the fact that if we strike, we're not going to be paid for those hours, and then they play on our compassion towards patients.
Another nurse, whom we've agreed to call Mary, says the job has got harder.
The pressure to be on the ball, to be able to advocate, to be able to pick up mistakes from others in the hospital setting to keep their patients safe. It's getting to a breaking point now.
The Nurses Organisation's Industrial Services Manager, C. Payne, isn't recommending to nurses which way they should vote over the pay deal, and also won't detail attendance at meetings other than to say it's positive. But C. Payne says there is concern about working conditions.
There's definitely a growing sense of frustration around unsafe levels of staffing, the increased workloads and the fatigue and stress that's causing for nursing.
She says if the pay deal is rejected and if a strike ballot follows, it will be a first for nurses.
We have had some regional strikes during the 1990s under the Employment Contracts Act, and certainly, they have to rely on other people coming in to support the services.
The outcome of the vote on the pay deal is expected to be released on Monday afternoon. Mō te hotaka o te ahi ahi, ko Karen Brown, tēnei.
And in her post-cabinet media conference a short time ago, the Prime Minister was repeatedly asked about the pay negotiations, but she refused to say whether she thought 2% is an acceptable offer. Jacinda Ardern says she will not be intervening in the pay dispute.
That would be a question for those who are involved in the negotiations. Obviously, those are undertaken between DHBs and between the NZNO. It's not something that the government is directly involved in. It is a very distinct negotiation with at DHB level. Of course we value the role of our nurses, as we value the role of our police officers and our teachers. But this is a negotiation that is currently underway through DHBs, and it's not something that we should or are able to directly intervene in.
Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, speaking a short time ago at her post-cabinet media conference held every Monday. A lot of feedback coming in on this bridge in Ngāroa Wahia, and it is very much along these lines. This is a thoroughly representative sample. Helen says, re-bridge jumping. Can't a corporate step up and create a jumping diving platform on the river for the community, create a better alternative to jumping off the rail tracks, incentivise it with a camera on it to create a bomb selfies opportunity, etc. Make better fun elsewhere, says Helen. Somebody called David Shearer, we're not sure which David Shearer it is, but whichever one it is, we're delighted to hear from them, says, Dear John, train bridge, why isn't there some sort of platform or walkway attached to the outside of the bridge to enable a kid to get out of the train's path? Kids could still jump off it. Lots of you saying that. In reference to jumping off the train bridge, how much is a life worth? This listener asks, is it enough to pay for a walkway beside the bridge or a warning signal? And Mark says, how about Kiwi Rail and the local council provide a train-free high dive platform so Ngāroa Wahia kids have somewhere else to jump into the river? These are interesting questions, and we're going to do some work on them because they seem on the face of it very sensible ideas, but we wonder about whether people are concerned about the risk of what happens when the kids get into the river. In other words, if you build the platform and a kid gets swept away after they've jumped in, will you, as the platform builder, be held liable for that accident? So we will make some investigations, because these sound like thoroughly sensible suggestions, and there are lots of you pointing out there is actually a structure already beside the bridge that could be used for jumping off if the children of Ngārawa Wahia are utterly determined to keep doing that. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. Coming up, international chemical weapons inspectors will arrive in southern England tomorrow to try and verify the nerve agent used to poison the former Russian spy and his daughter. Hawke's Bay looks set to lose $1.8 million in tourism funding. Where's the money going? And the increased cost of visiting the dentist. This is a public health issue. People are saying, we'd love your feedback. We're getting a lot of it already. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Nona is sitting on one side of me, furiously scribbling and making notes. But before business, Katrina with the headlines.
Jacinda Ardern has written to Donald Trump seeking an exemption from his controversial steel and aluminium tariffs. The US president has exempted some countries, including Canada, Mexico and Australia. And Ms Ardern has promised that, as well as trade matters, she'll raise human rights in a meeting with the Indonesian President Joko Widodo at Parliament about to get underway. The Tiwai aluminium smelter will pay the greatest share of a $4 million deal to clean up hazardous waste in Southland. The smelter dross has been piling up for nearly 2 years. Hospital nurses say they're under pressure and angry about low pay and staffing levels. By the end of the week, up to 27,000 nurses are expected to have voted on whether to accept a pay deal. A Ngārawahia resident is rubbishing claims that being on the town's rail bridge and jumping off it is some sort of rite of passage for young people. Yesterday, an 11-year-old girl who was walking across the bridge was hit and killed by a train. Polly Martin, who was born and bred there, says educating local children about the dangers is very important. A political scientist says a new report highlights that New Zealand's effort to make the country an easy place to do business also makes it an easy mark for criminals. The police estimate that at least $1.35 billion is laundered in the country each year. Myrtle rust has spread to the Manawatu. The Ministry for Primary Industries says the fungus was found on a young ramarama in a planted area off Victoria Esplanade in Palmerston North. Officials in the US are now offering a reward of more than $100,000 for information on a deadly wave of parcel bombings in the city of Austin, Texas. 2 people have been killed and 2 others injured in 3 blasts from packages left on doorsteps this month. The police are now dealing with a fresh explosion in which 2 men have been injured. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks very much indeed, Katrina. We'll have more on money laundering coming up, but let's turn to business. Legitimate, above-board business, Nona Peltier.
That's the kind.
Nice to have you back, Nona.
Thank you.
A state-owned organisation says local companies are falling short when it comes to giving investors the information they expect. By golly, I've heard this criticism a lot over the years. What kind of information are investors looking for?
We're talking about non-financial information in this case.
Right.
So, yes, there's the rules, and then there's the other kinds of information, which at this time is not compulsory. And the kind of information we're talking about is like environmental, sustainability, these kinds of gender diversity. How are the companies doing against sort of the benchmark of social, socially responsible commercial interests? So, for example, it could be, the impact of a product on the environment. How are they doing on a community initiative? Those kinds of things.
And we see this pop up from time to time. The use of palm oil, for example.
Yeah, those kind of things. Yeah.
And also what they're paying their staff, whether unions are allowed access to the workplace. So these kind of big picture takes on a company that aren't merely about their financials.
And that's increasingly important. And we've seen that, with the outcry over KiwiSaver investments in arms and those kinds of things. People don't want to, they want to know what they're investing in. And so, but the thing is, on the other side of it, companies know that this type of reporting, especially year by year, is quite expensive to do. I mean, as soon as you start measuring something, you can expect to add some dollars beside that because it costs something to measure things. But it's the old adage, measure what matters. And for some companies...
Measure what matters, Nona.
Yes, that's right. And of course, it's expensive to do that. And but it does matter, and it's increasingly important. At this moment, the External Reporting Board, which is a government state-owned enterprise, they're saying, you know, it's not compulsory at this stage, but it's something the FMA has been talking about, something the markets are talking about as, you know, something that companies may be required to do in the future.
I think we should ask for feedback on that. Texas 2101 in response to what Nona was just talking about. What a fascinating thing to consider. The first ever trial of someone accused of insider trading got underway at the High Court in Auckland today. What has been learned on day one?
Well, we have our expert court reporter on the job, Edward Gay, and looking at his report only, because it is before the court and a jury has been paneled. So at this stage, it really everything is before the court, and because of that, we're going to limit our conversation to what's actually been reported.
So you and I don't spend a night in the cells? No.
It's pretty much the way we want to read it here.
Excellent.
So what we have is the name of the accused, and his name is, I have it right here, should be handy, yes indeed. Hamish Mark Sansom is his name, and he was, he's accused of insider trading under the Financial Markets Authorities Act, the new regulations that came into effect in 2013. So it's the very first case to go to trial. He's pleaded not guilty, and he's accused of receiving a text and then acting upon it and selling some shares at a premium price. So there you go. That's basically it. And we're going to be covering this case every day.
Yeah, Edward does a good job of that stuff
too. He does indeed.
Right, thanks, Nona. What happened on the markets today?
Oh yeah, I've mixed up all my papers now, of course.
Right.
Okay, so the NZX rose nearly 0.2% to 8,492. That's a rise of 15 points. Dollar's down a little bit, and that's because the U.S. Federal Reserve is likely to raise interest rates this
So the
week.
index is at record levels, is it?
It's close.
Close, yep.
Very close, like
Yep.
just off. So the dollar's trading at 72 US cents, 93.6 Australian, and 51.7 pence. And it's worth saying that our market performed pretty well, considering some Asian markets were down on this, you know, the U.S. Federal Reserve coming out this week.
Nona Peltier, business reporter based here in Auckland. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the weather now with Met Service meteorologist John Law, who is back with us this week in Wellington. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. As we head in towards Tuesday, the weather is very similar to that we've seen on Monday. A few showers to watch out for as we start the day up in the far northern parts of the country. We'll find them becoming more confined towards that eastern coast, and temperatures still reaching highs of around about 24 degrees Celsius in Auckland. A few showers with us for the Bay of Plenty as well, but head down towards Waikato and even down in towards Taranaki. A bit of patchy cloud, but much of the time staying fine and dry, and temperatures again up into the low 20s. It's generally a fine looking day in Wellington as well, up in towards the Kapiti coast. We might find daytime temperatures a little bit cooler, 22 degrees Celsius, but other than a bit of high cloud, it's a fine looking story for the capital. We are going to keep, though, a bit more cloud on the eastern coast of the North Island. A few showers to watch out for Hawke's Bay and Gisborne, but those showers in Hawke's Bay should clear off as we head in towards the afternoon. Some of the best weather, though, down on the eastern side of the South Island. Plenty of fine and sunny weather for the likes of Christchurch and Canterbury. Highs back to about 25 degrees Celsius, but there is some wetter weather still with us through parts of Fiordland and those southern parts of Westland, and spilling across in towards Southland as well. So do keep an eye on those watches and warnings, and we have got some cooler temperatures to come as we head through the rest of this week. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, there's some autumnal weather on the way, that's for sure. A $4 million deal has been struck to clean up thousands of tonnes of hazardous Tiwai smelter waste dumped around Southland. 22,000 tonnes of the partially treated smelter dross called Uvea Premix has stockpiled in Mataura and in Invercargill since the Tiwai processing company Taha International went into liquidation 18 months ago. The aluminium smelter company and government are putting in most of the funding for the deal. 4 councils and private landlords will make up the rest. There are already calls to make sure it can never happen again. Here's our Otago Southland reporter, Ian Telfer.
Southland's waste stockpiles were the hot potato no one wanted to hold. Taha's liquidators had built the plan to send the stockpiles overseas, but couldn't get the money to ship it there, so walked away before Christmas. So for 3 months behind the scene, the Gore District Council's Chief Executive, Steve Parry, has been quietly brokering a deal between the 10 parties. Steve Parry says it's a huge milestone after what he calls a challenging negotiation.
This is a deal where I don't think any party involved is doing high fives and somersaults. It's kind of a deal that all the parties can live with and can actually see light at the end of the tunnel.
Mr Parry says the smelter company New Zealand Aluminium Smelters and the government are together covering $3 million, and the other $1 million will come from the 4 Southland councils and the 4 landowners. The parties are so far shy about discussing the exact costs or who's taking the waste and where, but Mr Parry confirmed it'll be sent to Australia and will take longer than the 18 months the liquidators planned for.
It could take a bit longer than that, to be fair. We're talking 22,000 tonnes. Probably, I think it will be at least 2 years before all the stuff is gone from Southland premises.
Michael Laws has represented the landlords, including the old Myrtle paper mill, which has 10,000 one-tonne bags of the waste stored inside.
Of course we're delighted that the solution's been reached. Of course we're delighted that the government is putting out money. But, gee, you'd legally argue it's the government's dross anyhow, under the bone of a cantia legal rule. Yes, landlords are contributing money, but at the end of the day, I have enormous sympathy for their particular plight. They've been strung along by a series of individuals, not least Taha International.
Mr Laws confirmed the waste will be sent through TY Smelter's new processor in Nalco. But it's not been forgotten in Southland that this has happened before. An earlier processor of TY dross, Haysoms, went bust in 1991, leaving thousands of tonnes in Bluff. Michael Laws says the smelter can't avoid its responsibilities.
Everybody said, no, never again. Well, it's happened again. Really, there's a responsibility upon central government in particular, but also local government to make sure that they may well be a major economic player in Southland, but they have been also a polluter.
The smelter wouldn't give an interview today, and nor would it say how much it's contributing. The government confirmed its slice is coming from the Waste Minimisation Fund run by the Ministry for the Environment, though it won't say how much either until the agreement's signed. The final deal's expected to be signed in the next couple of weeks. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Criminals and fraudsters are estimated to be laundering at least $1.35 billion in New Zealand each year. Police admit it's likely to be much more. In its second assessment on the risks the country faces from money laundering and financial terrorism or financing terrorism, police found most of the laundering is from drugs and fraud. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
The report by the Police Financial Intelligence Unit attempts to quantify how much illicit money is laundered through the economy. The manager of the unit, Andrew Hill, says it's not an easy exercise.
The main reason why there's fairly high degree of uncertainty as to what that actual number might be of money generated is because, unfortunately, criminals don't file annual returns like other businesses.
That hasn't stopped the police having a stab at it. It estimates about $1.35 billion in ill-gotten gains is generated for laundering, with drugs accounting for more than half of that and fraud another third. But Mr Hill says that captures only the tip of the iceberg.
I'm really trying to stress that term generated for laundering because you can imagine that with a money laundering cycle, what a money launderer needs to do is they need to put the money through as many different transactions as they realistically can to distance themselves from the criminal origin of the money. And each time that you do that, that's increasing the transactional value of the money laundering.
A political scientist, Ron Pohl, says the true figure could be anywhere from $2 to $10 billion a year if tax evasion and transnational crime is included. Dr Pohl says the report highlights an uncomfortable truth, that New Zealand's boast as an easy place to set up companies and trusts to do business also makes the country an easy mark for criminals.
So often political reports only present one side of it. Here the police report is actually very good because it presents both. It says that it recognises that New Zealand is a good place to do business, but actually that represents a significant threat for New Zealand as well because it's actually a place where criminals can easily do business.
Successive governments have toughened up rules as part of global efforts to combat money laundering. Anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism legislation is now in place, and further measures to tighten up the rules are in train. The police also launched its first dedicated money laundering investigations team last April, which Andrew Hill says has resulted in more charges being laid, mainly related to drugs. However, the chair of Transparency International, Suzanne Snively, says more needs to be done.
We're calling for a totally public register of beneficial ownership of both trusts and companies from offshore. We can't see why that shouldn't be just a matter of fact in New Zealand. The European Union is planning to do the same thing in Europe.
Suzanne Snively will talk to the government about this issue next month. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
International chemical weapons inspectors will arrive in southern England tomorrow. They'll be trying to verify the type of nerve agent used to attack the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in Salisbury. It comes as the diplomatic crisis between Russia and Britain intensifies. The British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has now accused Russia of not only making the nerve agent but illegally stockpiling it. The BBC's James Robbins has more.
The decontamination work and forensic investigation in Salisbury goes on. 2 weeks after the chemical attack on Sergei and Yulia Skripal, it's clear that one focus of the inquiry is his BMW, amid suggestions that the chemical agent might have been placed there to ensure that the occupants were poisoned. A team of international chemical weapons experts from the global body which polices their prohibition arrives in Salisbury tomorrow. They'll begin a further independent investigation.
It is very important.
Today, the Foreign Secretary went further than ever, blaming Russia and lifting the veil a little on secret intelligence. Boris Johnson says it shows Russia has been making nerve agent within the past decade.
We actually have evidence within the last 10 years that Russia has not only been investigating the delivery of nerve agents for the purposes of assassination, but has also been creating and stockpiling Novichoks.
The Foreign Secretary also dismissed and derided a suggestion from one of Russia's most senior diplomats that the nerve agent used in Salisbury could actually have come from Britain's own military research facility at Porton Down.
Porton Down, as we now all know, is the largest military facility in the United Kingdom that has been dealing with chemical weapons research. And it's actually only 8 miles from Salisbury.
You're not suggesting that Porton Down is responsible for this nerve agent?
I don't know. I don't know.
John, lovely to see you this morning.
But Theresa May's government got solid support from Labour's Shadow Chancellor after criticism of Jeremy Corbyn's more questioning approach.
Putin has questions to answer because this is highly likely this could be a state execution. But what we don't do in this country is that we don't leap to conclusions without the evidence.
As the investigation goes on in the next few days, the government will focus on broadening international backing for Britain's stance. On Tuesday, ministers who sit on the National Security Council will discuss whether or not to launch a second round of measures against Moscow at the risk of an endless tit-for-tat.
James Robbins. Meanwhile, speaking after his election victory today, the Russian President Vladimir Putin insisted Russia had destroyed all its chemical weapons. He also said it was unimaginable that Russia would be behind this attack, especially ahead of this year's World Football Cup, which is being held in Russia, of course. Christchurch's Anglican Bishop, Victoria Matthews, has announced she's stepping down. Ms Matthews has led the Christchurch branch of the Anglican Church for 10 years, including through the Christchurch earthquakes, which devastated their cathedral, of course. In September last year, Synod decided to restore the building at a cost of more than $100 million. Bishop Matthews had previously supported demolishing the building, but now she says she's happy it's being reinstated. In a statement this afternoon, Ms Matthews says the diocese has been through many challenges in the last 10 years, brought about by earthquakes, wind, fire and floods. She says she will spend time reflecting on what her next steps will be after she steps down from her position on May 1st. Now, one of the people Bishop Matthews worked closely with during her tenure was Christchurch's Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, who says she didn't always agree with Ms Matthews, especially regarding the cathedral. However, Ms Dalzell says the bishop was completely selfless in how she led the church, and she can leave knowing she played an important role in very difficult times.
Look, it was a very challenging time with respect to the cathedral decision. It would have been extremely difficult for her because her role is as a spiritual leader, and that is quite different from the role of mayor. I have a different calling. That meant that we didn't necessarily agree on things, but I think that she can leave knowing that she is leaving the city in good heart and that she has played an important role at a very, very difficult time.
Was Christchurch's Mayor Leanne Dalzell. Christchurch's Anglican Bishop, who's announced she's stepping down. Victoria Matthews is not available for an interview, but we would love to talk to her. It's 11 minutes to 6. A proposal to slash $1.8 million from Hawke's Bay's tourism funding Has the local industry worried it could ultimately cost the region hundreds of millions of dollars a year, potentially? The Hawke's Bay Regional Council wants to cut the organisation's funding by half over the next 3 years in order to spend more money on the environment and cleaning up waterways. But tourism operators say the plan will cost them and the region's economy dearly. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley.
It's been a big weekend in the Hawke's Bay for the tourism industry, with the Horse of the Year competition, a free concert at Napier Soundshell and the docking of the biggest ever cruise ship to New Zealand. And while the owner of cottages on St Andrews and Havelock North, Diane Ross, has been flat off her feet, the proposal to cut Hawke's Bay tourism's funding by $1.8 million over the next 3 years has her incensed.
It would definitely have an impact. It would have an impact on all businesses. Hawke's Bay is just absolutely thriving and growing rapidly. And now when everything's going well, let's just take all the money away from them. And I just don't understand the rationale.
Tourism employs more than 6,000 people in Hawke's Bay, and visitors spent $630 million last year, which is about 8% of the region's GDP.
Hi.
Hi Neil, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Neil Barber is the owner of the famous Art Deco Masonic Hotel in Napier and the chair of the Hawke's Bay Tourism Industry Association. Visitor spending is estimated to top $800 million over the next 3 years, but he says funding cuts could put that growth at risk.
It most certainly is. No other region that is facing a decrease in funding, which seems quite inequitable. It won't fall off dramatically overnight, but it will with time. No investment in tourism funding, and then a marked decline in visitor numbers and visitor spending.
Speaking from Melbourne, the chair of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, Rex Graham, says Tourism Hawke's Bay's funding was increased by $1.8 million 2 years ago to get it off the ground. He says it worked well, and now it's time for the industry to stand on its own 2 feet.
It was a very close vote whether they continue to get it or not. But in the end, the majority decided that we should move on, and they should move on, and they should commercialise this funding.
Mr Graham says the money would be better spent elsewhere.
Most of the councillors want to get back to their core competency of fixing rivers, lakes and streams and estuaries, etc. And they didn't feel this was their core competency.
Diane Ross, whose online petition calling for the current level of funding to be maintained, disagrees.
We put in huge amounts of money, but we can't do it on our own. We can't do television ads. We can't do national spreads in Viva magazine in New Zealand Herald. We just don't have that budget.
The Hawke's Bay Tourism Industry Association is holding a meeting for its members on Wednesday to discuss what it calls this funding crisis. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
A lot of feedback coming tonight, thank you, and it's on all the issues we're covering really, including this one on Tiwai Point. I can't believe Tiwai Point aren't made to pay for their own waste disposal. Tiwai Point smelters owners must laugh all the way to the bank about what a pushover New Zealand is, says Andrew from Christchurch. I'm getting heartily sick of the taxpayer picking up the tab for these multinationals who make billions in profit and sheet home their costs to the poor old taxpayer time and time again. Thank you, Andrew. Lots of feedback. We'll have more of it in a sec. Some of it relating to this story, actually. You're getting in advance. The Dental Association says financial help for those who can least afford dental care is an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Help for the low paid is available through work and income, but the association says this only covers emergency work, and there is a case for increased government subsidies to help people get the care they need. Conan Young on this story.
Couple Jared and Mel Smith admit to having terrible teeth which cause them pain and much more besides.
Does your head in, you can't think. I've got 5 children, I've been getting grumpy, just no good.
And your appearance as well, you know, it like puts you off like going to get a job for starters, even just like talking to people, covering your mouth and bad breath.
Going through the hospital is their best option, but even then there's a long wait.
I mean, my teeth are buggered. I need all my teeth pulled out, and it's going to cost over about $4,000 or $5,000. So going through the hospital is probably going to cost about $300-400, which is a lot cheaper.
There's a long wait to get on. It's up to 4 months for our teeth to come out. So, yeah, I was in agony for about 2 months, wasn't I? And I went there the other day, and they pulled out 2.
The president of the Dental Association, Bill O'Connor, says work and income needs to offer more financial assistance so people don't put off getting treatment they desperately need. He says not enough is being done to stop people like Jared and Mel from ending up with teeth so bad they need to have them all removed.
It's probably not enough for most of the people that use that service. You know, it'll get them out of pain and get an immediate problem fixed, but it doesn't solve long-term problems.
Mr O'Connor, who is also a dentist, says the argument could be made the government needs to extend free dental care beyond the age of 18, but it's complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a case for it to be made to be subsidised for a longer period of time. I guess where do you stop and how much is it going to cost? Kids leave school or leave the system at 18 and they should be dentally fit. So you could, I don't know, where do you stop?
So just how expensive is it to visit the dentist? A filling I had recently at the Linwood Dental Centre in Christchurch cost $160. But across town it could have cost more, a lot more.
Thank you for calling Lumino, the dentist, Christchurch City. You're speaking with Jake. How can I help?
Oh, hello. Look, I'm just wanting to know how much you charge for a filling.
Depends on the size of the filling. So very small, about 200, and a ridiculously large filling is about 350.
It was a similar story at two further dentists I called, up to twice as much as the filling I paid for at Linwood Dental, while a fourth charged just slightly more. A root canal would set you back between $1,000 and $1,300. My dentist, Peter Payne, says he charges less because that is all most of the people he sees can afford.
Dentistry has to be sensitive to the patient's ability to pay, but we can't charge so little that we can't buy the right products. If I buy an electric drill, I don't buy the most expensive one, I buy the mid-range.
Mr Payne, who has been working in lower socio-economic Linwood for 40 years, says the two main reasons people don't visit him as much as they should are a fear of going to the dentist and the cost. He says for those who can least afford it, help from work and income is available, but not always.
We do a lot of quotes for wins, and they will provide money to people. It seems to be on a haphazard basis. Some people can get all the money, we might say $1,500 for some cases, and other people struggle to get $200 or $300.
When it comes to getting your teeth fixed, it really does pay to shop around. A Consumer New Zealand survey across the country recently confirmed RNZ's experience in contacting dentists in Christchurch. Its chief executive, Sue Chetwin, says it found a huge variation in what they charged, from $80 to $500, depending on whether a composite or amalgam filling was used.
Most of the practices would give us an estimate, if you rang up and asked, well, how much would a filling cost, obviously those are quite broad numbers. But we found some dental practices to refuse to even give that sort of estimate, and we thought that was poor because, people should be able to shop around.
Where you live also impacts on the price. Auckland has cheaper dental care than the other main centres.
In Auckland, for separate appointments for an exam and clean, it was $226, in Wellington $284, in Christchurch $240. So there were some, I guess, when you're looking at that sort of money, it's starting to be reasonable differences.
The chances of any sort of help from the government towards the cost of dentistry currently look slim. Asked for comment, Minister of Health David Clark replied with a statement saying that while he wanted dental care to become more accessible and affordable over time, there were no immediate plans to change the current entitlement age for free care beyond 18. For Checkpoint, ko Konanyang Tēnei.
The moment we started promoting that the story was coming up on the program, we received an enormous amount of feedback on it. I have several teeth missing in my mouth now because despite regular dentist visits, I cannot afford crowns. So have just had to get the teeth pulled out. It is a health issue, says Audrey. Anthony says, re-expensive dental treatment. I visited the dentist last week to get a chipped tooth repaired. It was caused by accident, so covered by ACC. I was told my contribution towards the cost was to be $155, which I paid. How is this affordable to people on low incomes? We should not, says John in Dunedin, spend taxes subsidising those companies buying up our New Zealand dental practices. Set up a government-owned network. And someone just said, spare me, I think, about the suggestion that the dentists should be subsidised. A lot of feedback on trains, and almost all of it says there must be an alternative provided to these kids because, as Mike Smith points out, Ngāroa Wahia is an area of economic deprivation. There isn't much to do. The river and the bridge are very much part of the life of that community. Mike Smith points out that when he was a kid, he would go and play by the train tracks too, and his idea of a good time was putting a coin on the tracks and watching the train flatten it. And I seem to recall having done the same thing myself as a child. In China, says Peter, all classic rail bridges have a pedestrian walkway because they know they cannot stop people walking along the tracks. And Ron Wilson, you're a lovely man, Ron, thank you for your nice comment, says all trains must come to a stop. And if the way is clear, proceed slowly across the bridge. Yes, it will take a few minutes longer to do this, but it will save lives. Time is something we have. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. Ngāroa Wahia is today mourning an 11-year-old girl who was killed by a train on the town's rail bridge last night. She's believed to have been walking across it with friends when struck by a southbound freight train. There are fences on either side of the line at both ends of the bridge, but access to it is still very easy. A 9-year-old boy was killed on the bridge in 2002, and risky behaviour on and around it has been a problem for years. The Ngāroa Wahia Fire Chief Carl Lapwood, who attended the scene last night, says installing bells might at least give kids a chance.
We put bells on crossings where cars cross over. You know, we've got kids on this crossing, and whether that's right or wrong is not for me to really determine, but the facts are, would bells help? Maybe they would. Maybe it would give them an early warning detection to give them a chance to get off if they need to.
Ngāroa Wahia's Fire Chief Carl Lapwood. The government is currently considering block offers for this year's oil and gas exploration permits, and one option could be that none at all are offered. On Parliament's forecourt today, the Prime Minister personally accepted a Greenpeace petition signed by 45,000 people wanting an end to oil exploration. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
The original plan was for the Energy Minister Megan Woods to accept the petition, but Jacinda Ardern says it's such an important issue she did it herself on the way to a state luncheon with the visiting Indonesian President Joko Widodo. Ms Ardern says, as is usual at this time of the year, the government is actively considering its decisions on future permits. She says environmental as well as economic considerations will be taken into account. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Meanwhile, Ms Ardern has promised she'll raise specific human rights concerns in her bilateral meeting with Indonesia's President Joko Widodo at Parliament. She says as well as discussing trade, there are certain matters she'll be raising.
They include, for instance, issues of freedom of speech and access of foreign media in the Papua region, and also the rights of LGBTIQ individuals in Indonesia, and talk of a criminal code applying to them.
Jacinda Ardern. The meeting began at 5 o'clock. The review of how the Labour Party handled complaints of sexual assault at its summer youth camp is expected to take between 2 and 3 months. The party this afternoon released the time frame in terms of reference for the investigation, which will be run by a senior lawyer, Maria Berryman. She'll look at the party's policies and procedures for managing events and handling complaints and consider whether they were correctly followed at the camp and whether they're adequate for providing a safe environment. Ms Berryman will recommend any changes she thinks are needed. A hospital emergency department nurse says she doesn't know any nurse who's voted for a proposed pay deal. Nurses throughout the country are nearing the end of meetings at which they're voting on a deal offered by district health boards. If accepted, it would give hospital nurses and midwives 2 rises of 2%, a lump sum payment, pay equity from July next year, and an agreement on how to implement safe staffing. An emergency department nurse RNZ agreed to call Julie says it's not clear whether nurses will approve the deal.
I don't personally know anybody that voted yes. I know there are people out there who have voted yes, especially given the scare tactics around the fact that if we strike, we're not going to be paid for those hours, and then they play on our compassion towards patients.
Julie, a hospital emergency nurse. The Tauranga City Council's chief executive says it had no option but to evacuate the residents of the Bella Vista development. 10 days ago, 13 residents were forced to leave their homes within 24 hours amid fears Cyclone Holler would do serious damage. Gary Poole says the council is working with structural engineers but cannot say when the residents will be able to move back in.
We're working through the site on a house-by-house basis with the objective of hopefully having some of the residents back in their homes as soon as possible.
Gary Poole says the council will assess progress at the end of this week. Myrtle rust has spread to Manawatu. The Ministry for Primary Industries says the fungus was found on a young ramarama in a planted area of Victoria Esplanade in Palmerston North. Catherine Duthie, who heads the Ministry's Myrtle rust response team, says the infected plant will be removed and securely disposed of, and a field surveillance team will begin an intensive inspection of myrtle plants on all properties within a 200-metre radius. The destructive plant disease was first found in Northland last year and has since spread to other parts of the North Island. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Northern Irish golfer Rory McIlroy has ended an 18-month drought to win a 3-shot victory in the US PGA Tour's Arnold Palmer Invitational in Florida. The 4-time major winner birdied 5 of the last 6 holes to card an 8-under par final round of 64. It's his 14th win on the tour and his first tournament win of any kind since September 2016. Tiger Woods finished tied for 5th. The All Blacks coach Steve Hansen believes central contracting played a key part in helping Ireland win the Six Nations Championship and complete a Grand Slam in the process. Ireland wrapped up yesterday with a 24-15 win over England at Twickenham. Many critics thought England looked tired during the Six Nations campaign, possibly because of a hangover from last year's Lions tour. But Hansen says Ireland, who are coached by New Zealander Joe Schmidt, are at the top of their game.
We've got central contracting, which is allowing them to maybe have a little bit more control over playing time and player welfare better than some of the other countries where they don't have that luxury. And you see the result of that. Guys are coming out, and even though they've been on the Lions tour, the same tour the English boys have been on, they've had opportunity to rest up and be mentally and emotionally and physically able to go out and play good test rugby.
Steve Hansen. And the New Zealand free skier Finn Billis has come 5th in the latest slopestyle World Cup event in Italy, his best World Cup finish. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Citizen Science of a sort, we are talking weeds and whether some of them might be good for your garden. Colin Merck from Landcare is our expert guest, and we'd like your help with identification. Email your weed shots to nights@radionz.co.nz and we will get Colin's word on whether that plant is friend or foe after the news at 7.
And on Lately at 10, we're live and we'll be keeping you up to date with the world, talking to some of the people who have made the news or are just worth talking to. That's Lately with Karen Hay on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow: Northland, Great Barrier Island, Coromandel Peninsula, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Cloudy periods and a few showers. For the remainder of the North Island, that's western areas from Auckland to Wellington, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Mainly fine, but a few showers about Auckland and Western Bay of Plenty and the odd afternoon shower inland. Nelson and Buller, cloudy periods, a few showers about the ranges, spreading elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, a few showers north of Hokitika, but rain with heavy falls elsewhere. Marlborough, Canterbury and North Otago, fine with variable high cloud. Central Otago, Dunedin, Clutha and mainland Southland, mainly fine and warm with high cloud, but a few brief falls of rain. Stewart Island, occasional rain, and the Chatham Islands, fine and cloudy periods, a few showers tomorrow night. It's just gone 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Only days after locals came to his office to insist something be done about the dangers of the Narua-Wahia rail bridge, Waikato District Mayor Alan Sanderson admits after this latest fatality, education may not be enough to make local children safe. I was looking before at the Kiwi Rail media releases over years now, begging, urging, asking children to stay off the bridge. Children still go on it in great numbers on sunny days. An 11-year-old was killed last night when a southbound freight train connected with her on the bridge in the North Waikato town. On average, 35 train services cross the Ngārawa-Wahia Bridge every day. Mayor Sanson says short of posting a security guard at either end of the bridge, which is simply not practical, obviously, he's out of ideas.
John, I think this is something that's happened for decades in relation to people that have jumped off these bridges for swimming into the river, or actually kids have played on these bridges. And I think it probably needs a culture change within people's attitude towards the safety on these bridges and the activities they've been taking out. And you know, it's been sort of part and parcel of this community and other communities that are associated with the rivers around jumping off these structures. And I don't know what the answer is. I know that we've worked very, very hard with both Kiwi Rail and the police for a number of years around trying to educate young people, to the point where the last 3 years we've been running programs down on the river edge with over 300 kids participating around the health and safety issues in relation to these structures and the activities they take out on them.
Yeah, I look at the Kiwi Rail media releases, I look at the newspaper coverage. There has been plea after plea after plea from everyone to the local children to not jump off the bridge. The fact of the matter is, though, that the local children jump off the bridge. And as you say, they've been doing it for generations. And so does there need to be some kind of warning system whereby, for example, like a level crossing, the train triggers some bells as it approaches from 500, 800 metres away and kids know to get the hell off the bridge?
Maybe that's an option. I hadn't thought of that before. There is a bell crossing right beside the northern end of the bridge, and there's one only about 50 metres from the southern end of the bridge, so I would imagine the kids would hear those bells. They're quite loud.
Right.
And, you know, I think in this situation, an 11-year-old girl, most of the children that I see jumping off the bridge are of an older age, but a young 11-year-old girl probably got caught unawares, probably wasn't used to being out there, and unfortunately couldn't get off the bridge in time.
It's heartbreaking. What discussions have taken place today? What's happened today about all of this?
Oh, look, let's put it this way. It is certainly the conversation in town today, as you could only imagine. And, you know, this is a tight community, and this is an absolute tragedy, no matter which way you couch it. And it's, you know, you've got to put your heart out for the mother and the whānau here in relation to this. Just, I don't know, words just can't describe how, you know, difficult it is at the moment.
The question is, how does it stop? And I'm not being disrespectful of the public education efforts that have been made so far. And I know people have worked really hard. And, you know, I'm the father of teenagers, and I know what I say to them. They nod and they listen, but then they're off with their mates, and bravado kicks in, or excitement kicks in, or you need to have some kind of way of preventing them from doing it or getting them off the bridge before the train gets there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think, John, totally agree with you. I don't know really what the answer is. Next to putting a security guard at either end of the bridge, which is just not practical, I really don't know. And I think probably the only tool that, as I said before, the Kiwi Rail, the police and ourselves have got is better education within the community. There's a lot of well-meaning people. I had people in my office only a week ago that were concerned about this and asked for some help to actually more around awareness of the dangers of it. So I'd already undertaken to hold a public meeting and bring all the parties together and get the community in and actually try and get some more information out there around the risks of these kids being on these structures. And, you know, that's become even more important. But more importantly, I said to the people as they were leaving my office, I hope we don't have to meet on sad circumstances, and that's exactly what's happened in this case. And I just rue the day that this would happen.
Mayor Alan Sanson talking to us a short time ago. The solution to the railway bridge is incredibly simple. Put a pedestrian crossing on it, says one listener. Build the kids a safe platform to dive off, says another listener. In fact, lots and lots of people are saying that. Thank you for your feedback. And also, we're receiving story after story about the high cost of going to, the prohibitive cost, many of you are saying, of going to the dentist in New Zealand. Thank you. 6:13. The government says it won't pay for dairies to install cigarette vending machines, despite calls by retailers who want them introduced in an effort to stop robberies. A group of Hamilton dairy owners have put forward the idea after a spate of violent robberies, including one where a shopkeeper was attacked with a machete. But the vending machines are only allowed in R18 premises, and one Auckland dairy owner says there's a simpler solution: stop selling cigarettes. Sally Murphy has more.
Una Granger, who runs a Calgary superette on Auckland's Dominion Road, stopped selling cigarettes 3 weeks ago.
The reason is not just the safety factor, but the fact that the price increases and the profit margin drop down, so just not worth it.
Miss Granger has owned the dairy with her husband for the past year. They've never been robbed, but other nearby shops have been. Large signs saying they don't sell cigarettes are not the only thing that makes this dairy different.
We installed the bars just before Christmas. We were still selling cigarettes then, but I said to my husband, look, there's been robberies up there, not far from here, within a kilometre radius. And I said, have it put up, because Christmas time, that's when those hoons are going to be desperate.
It's like a jail in here though, eh?
I'm behind bars.
Right across the counter is a floor-to-ceiling gate. Miss Granger says she feels safer with the bars and no cigarettes or tobacco on sale. A packet of 20 cigarettes now costs almost $30. Miss Granger says while sales have gone down 20% since they stopped selling tobacco products, she feels safer in her shop. 120 kilometres down the road in Hamilton, dairy owners are feeling very different after 2 violent robberies over the past week. They're calling on the government to fund cigarette vending machines. But by law, cigarette vending machines are only allowed in R18 premises, such as bars. The machines were banned in England in 2011 and in parts of Australia in 2006. The Office of the Police Minister, Stuart Nash, says the government is not considering providing cigarette machines, but the government does give subsidies to shop owners for increased security systems. Otago University Professor of Public Health and Marketing, Janet Hook, says, with the aim of having the country smoke-free by 2025, it's time for the sale of tobacco to be restricted.
I think an alternative solution that would have much greater public health benefits would be to say, let's get rid of tobacco from these retail outlets. Let's change our distribution and supply model and to have tobacco available only from a very small number of R18 outlets that only sell tobacco products.
The Associate Health Minister, Jenny Salisa, who was responsible for the smoke-free target, wasn't available for an interview today. In a statement, she said the focus of the tobacco control program has been primarily on reducing demand. She says options such as registering or licensing retailers and capping the number of retail outlets could be considered. In Auckland, Sally Murphy.
More feedback on the bridge, Ngārawa Wahia. Patrick says he went to Ngārawa Wahia High School in the early 80s when our principal would bring up the issue of the train bridge, basically every assembly, I think, Patrick is saying, over 30 years ago, and still children are dying in it. Lots of people saying, look, you just got to have a warning system. The train triggers bells or lights or whatever as it approaches. We will raise this as a suggestion with Kiwi Rail. Thank you. A group of Tauranga residents will have to wait indefinitely before moving back into their homes at a troubled housing development. The Bella Vista company went into liquidation in December, leaving about 30 houses unfinished. On March 9th, 13 families were forced to evacuate with only 24 hours notice amid fears that Cyclone Ola could do serious damage to their homes. Sophia Duckle-Jones spoke to some of the displaced families.
Family side, it's been pretty stressful. We've got 2 young kids under 2, and yeah, we just want to get into our home.
Andre and Chloe Stewart bought land at the development in July 2016, and building began last year. The family planned to move in by December, but the construction was stalled when Bella Vista Development went into liquidation and the contractors were laid off. The council then ordered a fix-it notice to complete some of the work, and an engineer was called on to oversee the construction of a retaining wall. A few weeks later, construction stopped altogether when the notice to evacuate was issued. The family has been living with friends since 2016, and now they don't know how much longer they'll have to wait.
Based off the fact we thought, hey, we had a time frame to be able to move into a house, but now we're having to look at alternatives for long term.
Jenny Coffey and her husband moved into their home in 2016 and say they never had a problem until they got the notice to evacuate. She says it's been stressful living in limbo.
We've done extra things to the house. We've got gardens, we've planted gardens, we've put lawn out. You know, we've put a lot of love and time in, so both sets of our parents have come and helped us over that time as well. So it's just horrible. I just want to be at home.
Tauranga City Council Chief Executive Gary Paul says the council had no option but to evacuate the residents. It's working with structural engineers, but Mr Paul says he's unable to give a time frame of when the residents will be able to move back in.
We're working through the site on a house-by-house basis with the objective of hopefully having some of the residents back in their homes as soon as possible.
The council hopes to have a better idea later this week on when the residents can move back in, but in the meantime, Gary Paul says the council will continue to pay for them to stay in motels. For Checkpoint, Sophia Ducker-Jones.
6:19, there has been another explosion in the American city of Austin, Texas, and 2 men have been injured. It comes as local police investigate 3 parcel bomb blasts in the past 10 days, which the police have said are connected. 2 people were killed in those incidents, while another was seriously injured. The police have announced a more than $100,000 reward for information on what they say may be targeted race hate crimes. The BBC's Tom Burridge has the latest.
A neighbourhood in Texas, Sunday night into Monday morning, residents here being evacuated. Police and FBI called to a property and reports of an explosion. 2 people, they say, taken to hospital.
We want to put out the message that we've been putting out, and that is not only do not touch any packages or anything that looks like a package, do not even go near it at this time, because given the darkness, we have not had an opportunity to really look at this blast site to determine what has happened.
This is already a city on high alert, with 2 people killed and 1 seriously injured in a series of parcel bomb attacks this month. Packages left on porches that explode when they're opened. The first in the north of the city was on March the 2nd. 2 more further south 10 days later. The first killed a 39-year-old African-American who picked up the parcel bomb outside his home. The second, a 17-year-old man, also an African-American, and the third, later the same day, seriously injured a 75-year-old Hispanic woman. Police have said it's not clear if she was the intended target. None of the packages were delivered by official services. All have been left during the night and picked up the next morning. Police say they are chasing hundreds of leads. They've set up a special hotline and are offering a reward of $115,000 for any information.
That report from the BBC. Residents in a small town on the New South Wales southern coast have been describing their frightening escape from a raging bushfire which tore through the township yesterday with little warning. It's been a quiet season on the bushfire front in in Australia, hasn't it? Many escaped to the beach as cyclonic winds fanned the blaze at a place called Tathra. It's feared up to 70 homes and buildings have been destroyed, but residents are still waiting to be allowed back to their homes, some not knowing what they'll find when they get there. The ABC's Angus Randall has been talking to locals and filed this report.
Wendy Whiting doesn't know whether her house is still standing.
So I packed a few things, what I get, not much. And the cat was the main trouble, so I got him, couldn't find him for a while, and then got in the garage, and the power was off. So then I was trapped in the garage and couldn't get the car out.
After escaping her garage, she drove to the Tathra Surf Club looking to stay near the safety of the water.
So then we said, well, we're so hot and so many, we'd go down on the beach. We got to the beach and it was like a cyclone. The sand hit you in the eyes. It was something terrible. So we walked all the way up again then. And then they said, oh, it's cool, you better go down to the water. So went down to the water again. Then they rang and said, everybody's evacuate, go to Bega.
Taz Fitzer has spent his whole life in Tathra. He's also waiting to know whether his house was claimed by the blaze.
We're still waiting to find out. We know that there were a couple of very brave neighbours who stayed and helped fight the flames over the night, and we've heard that we might be all right, but, you know, it's still just a bit of waiting to find out just the extent of the damage.
Warren Lerich was staying at the Tathra Caravan Park, but he's now spending his holiday at the Evacuation Centre in Bega.
Car's still there, so our car and everything's still there. We got a little bit of food, a little bit of clothes, and that was it.
pretty much what we could carry.
Tathra oyster farmer Gary Rodley has been told his house is still there. He fled to the beach with his family yesterday before driving to Bega to spend the night.
You know, we had the situation of people sitting there in this smoke haze and lots of elderly people actually sitting right on the water's edge, right on the edge of Tathra Beach in chairs. And so there was a great sense of community and people looking out for everyone else. When the final call came to evacuate, everyone went en masse then. Everyone could see that was the sensible thing to do.
He's hopeful he'll be able to head home sometime today. But while his oyster farm has avoided the flames, he won't know the impact on his produce until he's on site.
We didn't start the fire pumps yesterday, so we've had the low tide yesterday, and we'll be on tenterhooks for a little bit for some of those oysters that were in a situation where they would have been out of the water at low tide during that hot day yesterday. So, yeah, fingers and toes crossed, everybody, for us on that.
Gary Rodley's proud of how the community has come together to help those who may not have a home to go back to.
The Bega Evacuation Centre last night was quite amazing. You know, the short amount of time that people had, and, you know, they were feeding us. There was bowls of fruit coming round. There were bottles of water coming round. There were people from Salvos, there were people from Red Cross, there were medical people.
Leanne Barnes is the General Manager of the Bega Valley Shire Council. Like Gary Rodley, she's stunned by the response from those in the region.
We've been just overwhelmed with the number of things like mattresses, towels, clothing to support the people that are camped out here.
Kevin Stevens lives in Wagga Wagga but drove through the night to check on his holiday home in Tathra. He's still waiting to be allowed in and doesn't know whether his beach getaway is still standing.
Get in and see what's going on down there. And they might need a hand, so we'll stay for a couple of days to give all the locals a hand, and they'd do the same to us.
Kevin Stevens there, ending that report from Angus Rangandall. Weather conditions have now eased in Tathra, and the fire, which spans more than 1,000 hectares, not huge by Australian standards, has been downgraded from an emergency warning to watch and act level. 6:25. By golly, there's a lot of feedback on Ngārawa Wahia and its bridge. All suggestions, says Pat, so far have come from adult perspectives. Genuinely ask the advice of the kids, and I guarantee you will get a workable solution. Dear John, why doesn't the council, Kiwi Rail and the community chip in to make a proper river play with a jump-off point for older kids well away from the train over the bridge? John, couldn't Kiwi Rail install a warning horn, daylight hours only, that sounds at the railway bridge when a train is approaching so that those on or near the bridge can hear and know of the proximity of the train? Seems simple and cheaper than other means. How about a safe place, Nathan asks, for kids to jump into the river so that they don't have to go onto the bridge to jump into the water? Just an idea. Lots of you actually making that suggestion. Thank you. We are going to talk to Kiwi Rail about what warning systems are near the bridge. Are there bells that can be made to alert children or those jumping off the bridge to the approach of a train? And we will hope to have an answer for you tomorrow night. Let's go to Wellington, where Weta Workshop has officially launched the world's first mixed reality development studio, Weta Game Shop. The studio in the capital was created in partnership with the American firm Magic Leap. It will produce mixed reality games where players put on headsets that make virtual objects appear in your lounge. It's a lovely word, or wherever you happen to be. You don't have to be in a lounge. You can be anywhere at all. Here's Katie Scotcher.
Inside this nondescript Miramar warehouse, the world's first mixed reality development studio, Weta Game Shop, is being launched inside. This morning, over 50 Weta and Magic Leap staff were at the studio, which was officially opened by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Although not much of a gamer herself, Ms Ardern was one of the first to have a go.
New Zealand is really making a name for itself in games development generally. This is absolutely the next step forward for the globe, and the fact that this workshop here in Wellington is at the cutting edge of that is something we should all be really proud of.
Inside the studio, detailed collectibles and paintings inspired by game director Greg Broadmoor's own comic book, Dr. Groardbort's Invaders, decorate the walls. His comic book is also the inspiration for the first game, currently in the advanced stages of development, Dr. G Invaders. While many elements of the game and its technology are still shrouded in secrecy, Mr. Broadmoor described what keen gamers can expect.
there is much invasion. There are robots that will invade your home. Our game basically adapts itself to your space, wherever you're playing it. So when you put on the Magic Leap goggles and you pick up the control, you'll look down and you'll see a ray gun in your hand, and you'll look over at your wall and enemy robots will start coming out, climbing over your couch, moving around your house, and you've got to blow them to pieces in the comfort of your own home, or actually the discomfort, because it's actually really quite intense.
Magic Leap and Weta Workshop have been working on the project for 6 years. The co-founder of Weta Workshop, Sir Richard Taylor, says a lot of hard work has been put into the development.
It's the inventiveness that's required, the uncertainty that should you try something, it's going to pay dividends creatively, technically. So a lot of the people here have been focused tirelessly, not quitting, not giving up, not resolving to the fact that it's just too hard, but breaking new ground every year for the last 5 years.
Weta Workshop's executive producer, Hayley Gray, says the technology developed will affect more than just the gaming world.
This technology is going to change the world, full stop. I think in gaming, sure, it's going to advance gaming and it's going to reignite it in ways that we can't even imagine just yet. But I also think that it's going to have a huge impact on industries like education and e-commerce and training and communication. I mean, I just think it's so vast in terms of the areas that this technology is going to impact.
Although no official release date has been announced, gamers in the United States will be able to get their hands on the game later this year. In Wellington for Checkpoint, ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
It's about 30 seconds to go. Just enough time for some feedback on the thing Nona was talking about before, which is that we look at companies not just from the point of view of financials, but other things too. A bit of feedback on this. Good point about making ESG company information more readily available. Recently I looked at the latest annual report for Main Freight, and upon seeing an overrepresentation of men in the senior management ranks, 1 woman, approximately 20 men, I crossed this company off my list of companies to invest in. A lot of feedback tonight on a lot of different issues. We really appreciate and enjoy your engagement. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Ngarua Wahia Fire Chief says installing bells at a rail bridge where an 11-year-old girl died might at least give children a chance. This year's oil and gas exploration permits are being considered, and one option could be that none at all are offered. The government says it won't pay for the installation of cigarette vending machines in dairies to prevent robberies. And a bushfire has closed part of State Highway 1 near Tawa in Wellington. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I'm Nick Tipping. Every weekday morning from 9, I'll bring you The Works, a menu full of masterpieces on RNZ Concert. Hear the greatest performed by the greats. The Works with me, Nick Tipping, weekday mornings from 9 till midday on RNZ Concert.